be getting into all the predictions for UFC Fight Night Sandhagen versus Figueiredo. Before we get into that, let's have a look at how things have been going lately. I'm very excited to see the overall graph has eclipsed 200, which means that we have now doubled our starting bankroll from when we first started in V1. This graph is showing V2, so we're actually getting really close to doubling our bankroll just since the start of V2 as well. This graph was getting a little cramped, so I decided to add a little zoom in so that it's easier to see exactly what things have looked like in recent weeks. The only fight card that we had last week was UFC Fight Night Machado Gary versus Prates. We did well on that card, correctly predicting 10 out of the 14 fights and turning a profit of 8.23 units. We also had an opportunity to enter a contest predicting the draft picks in the first round for the NFL draft. I don't know anything about football, so I just gathered as many mock drafts as possible and compared them all to see what the most common predictions were. I used those predictions and ended up doing pretty well in the contest, returning a profit of 5.59 units with zero risk. Now that we're up to speed on the bankroll, let's have a look at this week's fight card. We'll be starting off in the women's flyweight division with a bout between Juliana Miller and Ivana Petrovic. Despite very little professional experience for these two, they both happen to have 3 fights in the UFC. They've each gone 1-2 over this period, with Juliana Miller having lost her last 2 and Ivana on a 1-fight losing streak. The only notable metrics that I'm seeing here is that Ivana's got a 5-inch reach advantage and that Juliana Miller has been away for 630 days. The two versions of the model don't agree here, but V2 is in line with the book odds. We'll be putting 2.3 units on Petrovic. Most of this card does take place in the lighter weight classes, but we do have one heavyweight bout between Thomas Peterson and Dontel Mays. Both of these guys are making a pretty quick turnaround here, and both of them were also finished in the first round in their last fight. Dontel suffered a first round heel hook, and Peterson suffered a first round KO. Despite being knocked out only a few months ago, Peterson is a moderate -240 favorite at the books. V1 is heavily in disagreement with that, but V2 is pretty much right in line at 65% chance of victory. We'll be taking Thomas Peterson for 2.4 units. We'll be spending a lot of the night in the bantamweight division. We're going to start it off with Quang Le versus Gaston Bolaños. There aren't a lot of differences between these two guys. Age is very similar, height and reach as well. They both fought about 170 days ago, so nothing serious there. What I am noticing is that Quang Le is 8-2 in his career, with his 2 losses being his only 2 in the UFC, while Bolaños is 2-1 in the UFC and currently on a 1-fight streak. Again, the two versions of the model don't agree here, with V1 leaning very slightly towards Gaston, while V2 is pretty heavy in favor of Quang. We'll be taking Lee here as an underdog for 1 unit. The next fight on this card is a women's strawweight matchup between Jillian Robertson and Marina Rodriguez. Looking at Marina's age, I'd normally tell you that it doesn't seem to matter too much in the women's divisions, but she's lost 4 out of her last 5 fights, and the only one she did win was to someone older than her. Jillian will be giving up a little bit in both height and reach, but despite that, she's still a pretty big favorite at -310. Both versions of the model agree that she's likely to win this fight, so we'll be betting enough to return 1.5 units on Jillian Robertson. Next up in the middleweight division, we have a matchup between Azamat Bekoev and Ryan Loder. Both of these guys will be making their second walk to the octagon after scoring ground and pound finishes in their first outings. Azamat was able to get it done in the first round, while it took Ryan Loder just a couple minutes into the second. Despite being several years younger, Azamat is much more experienced as a fighter, and the book odds at -380 as well as V1 at 61.5% favor him quite highly in this fight. Despite that, V2 just barely thinks that Loader edges it out in this one, so we will be taking him as a plus 315 underdog for 1 unit. We'll be closing out the prelims with the final female fight of the night between Yana Santos and Miesha Tate. To be completely honest, I thought both of these women had retired already. Yana Santos is 5-5 in the UFC and has lost 3 of her last 4. Miesha Tate is only 7-6 in the UFC, has lost 2 of her last 4, and those are the only 4 fights she's had since 2016. At the books, Tate is a small minus 132 favorite. V1 and V2 don't agree on this one, but V2 is very heavy on Tate in this fight. We'll be placing 1.3 units on Tate to win this one. The main card opener is a lightweight matchup between Mason Jones and Jeremy Stephens. Why did Jeremy Stephens come back? He's like the face of BKFC right now. The dude's killing it over there. I don't even understand why he would come back to the UFC at this point. On the other hand, this is a great opportunity for Mason Jones. He went 1-2 with 1 no contest in his first UFC run, and he's since gone on a 4-fight run in Cage Warriors with 3 finishes. And he gets the opportunity to come back against a name like Jeremy Stephens. At the book, Jones is a minus 550 favorite. Both versions of the model are very, very heavily in favor of Jones. We will be betting him for enough here to win 1.5 units. Back in the bantamweight division for a fight between Serhi Saidi and Cameron Smotherman. Saidi will be a couple inches taller and have a few inches in reach as well, but otherwise there isn't a whole lot differentiating these two guys. They both prefer the knockout as far as victories go, and they're both pretty new to the UFC, with Saidi going 1-1 since the Contender Series and Smotherman being 1-0 since entering the promotion. At the books, Saidi's a small minus 145 favorite, and both V1 and V2 are very much in line with that. We'll be taking Saidi here for enough to return 1.5 units. Sticking around for another bout in the bantamweight division, this one between Montel Jackson and Daniel Marcos. Man, I just don't know if I can get on board with this one. Montel Jackson is 8-2 in the UFC with some very impressive wins along the way. Marcos is still undefeated with 4 wins in the UFC, but as I would expect, he's a plus 175 underdog here. He's giving up a few inches in height and even more in reach, but both versions of the model are putting a lot of stake in that undefeated record. V2 is leaning towards Marcos extremely heavily at nearly 66% chance of victory. We will be taking Marcos here for 1.5 units. Next up, we've got a welterweight fight between Santiago Ponzinibbio and Daniel Rodriguez. I really enjoy watching these two guys fight, but man, they have been on a bad run lately. Ponzinibbio has dropped 5 of his last 8 outings, while Rodriguez has lost in 3 of his last 4. They're both coming off of a single victory and hoping to keep that run alive. The books and both versions of the model think that Santiago's the one to get it done here, so we'll be taking Santiago as a minus 125 favorite for enough to return 1.5 units. In the co-main event, we've got a middleweight matchup between Bo Nickel and Rene De Ridder. Bo is still undefeated at 7-0 and was taken to his first decision in his last outing against Craig Jones. De Ridder is significantly more experienced at 19-2. He's also the former double champ in one championship at light heavyweight and heavyweight. Despite his relative inexperience, as well as giving up a couple inches in both height and reach, Bo is still a minus 310 favorite at the books. Both versions of the model are on the same side of this fight, both predicting Nickel to win here, so we will be betting enough on him to return 1.5 units. We'll be closing out this card in the bantamweight division with a 5-round fight between Corey Sandhagen and Davison Figueiredo. Davison is the substantially shorter guy here, giving up 6 inches in height. Despite that, he's only at a 2-inch reach deficit. He's also a former flyweight, moving up to bantamweight, but that hasn't proven to be much of a problem for him as he's gone 3-1 since entering the division. Both of these guys are near the top of the division, and a big win here could put him in talks for a title shot. At the books, Corey Sandhagen is a pretty big -450 favorite, but both versions of the model are leaning towards Figueiredo here. We will be taking Figueiredo in this fight for 1.5 units. That's all the predictions out of the way, so let's have a look at some totals. We've got 12 fights on this card. V2 of the model predicts 8 favorites to win and 4 underdogs. V1 is in agreement on 5 of those favorites and just 2 of those underdogs. Our total risk on this card is 32.6 units with a potential profit of 22.81 units. If everything were to cash, we'd come up just shy of a 70% ROI. For those of you who like making money on other promotions as well, check the description below for the free Patreon link where PFL picks for this weekend are already live and One Championship picks will be live as soon as odds are available. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Good luck on all your bets this weekend.